Hello, and welcome to a new edition of Need to Know, a series of video interviews with companies who are shaping, creating, and innovating in the games industry today, and whose work will have a huge impact going forwards into the future. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Melissa Phillips of Games Leadership, here to talk to us today about leadership principles in the games industry and tips for creating positive impact. Melissa, it's lovely to have you here. Before we get going, do you want to tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do?
My name is Melissa Phillips, and I am the director of the Games Leadership Network and Academy. We offer leadership training, coaching, and courses to the games industry, and we're just about to launch our Games Leadership Blueprint course. This is our 12-week foundational leadership course that aims to provide you with a clear plan on what your next leadership steps are over the course of the next 3 months to a year. So we're helping leaders to really hone in on what they want to achieve and how they'll go about doing that. And it comes from my experience of coaching. I've coached over 250 games industry leaders now over the last 18 months. And I found that many wanted the same things, or at least similar things. And I was often repeating these learnings. So this course is everything that I would want to give to games industry leaders to kind of prepare them for the weird and wonderful world of games. And I've put it all into something called the Games Leadership Framework. And this approaches leadership in games from 3 different perspectives. It comes from me, you, and us. So me is the leader themselves. You is the individual team members who I manage and our personal relationships. And then us brings those two together and looks at how do we create a team and ultimately make games. So very much all of the content that I create is focused through these different lenses. And for the blueprint, it's worth mentioning that whilst this is a paid course, we also partner with our non-profit organization, which is the Games Leadership Network. And we provide scholarship placements. So we're always interested in finding partnerships as well and ways in which we can continue to provide this training for the wider industry.
Wonderful. We should jump straight in then. So at the top there, I mentioned leading by example. I mean, why do you think leading by example is so crucial for effective leadership, especially within the games industry?
I mean, we're part of such a really exciting and constantly evolving industry. Making games brings together so many different pieces of technology and creativity, teamwork, organization, and we can get into arguments about which of those is most important. But actually, when we're talking about effective leadership in any industry, what it really comes down to is people. So, interacting with people, building trust, being clear about our communication. And one of the easiest, and I'm going to use that word very lightly, but one of the easiest ways in which we can build a healthy workplace culture is by committing to and consistently embodying the sorts of behaviors that we want to see. So, leading by example is about understanding that when I am in a leadership position and asking for things from my team, that I also need to be prepared to do those things that I'm asking for, teach those things, and understand the value in what I'm asking others to do.
Absolutely. No, it makes a lot of sense. And what are some of the sort of pitfalls you've observed with people who sort of operate on a do as I say, not as I do type mentality when it comes to leadership roles?
Yes. So we're an industry that has, I think, for a long time appeared to value creativity over anything else. And that has served us well in some respects. You know, we're creating amazing new IPs, we're pushing boundaries as to what a game experience is, and we're crossing over into different media. But there's a real danger in that only valuing creativity can mean that we forget about the routine and the structure that create all of the things like psychological safety and career progression, and grounding that a lot of people need in order to feel secure in their jobs. So some of the common pitfalls that I see in leadership here might be, for example, a creative leader who is quite chaotic in a workplace environment. So they don't value routine. You might also need some of that structure though in order to build a game, so that you end up with this sort of like do as I say, not as I do approach, where the rules don't seem to apply to that leader in this scenario. They're constantly bending or breaking them. so that the team is never really sure what's coming next. So when we get that sort of chaotic creative values, sometimes that means that routine can go out of the window. And we're creatures of habits, we look for patterns, and that's just part of being human. Um, and our personalities will also dictate kind of how much change we can cope with before things start to unravel for us. We've all got these different thresholds, but in general, if I'm trying to work with someone who is completely inconsistent in their actions, then that can be very confusing to know what good looks like in that scenario. So if you've got chaotic leadership, which can sometimes be a lot of fun, it doesn't always feel awful, then there will be a level of tolerance as a threshold for the team that can sometimes feel confusing or at worst unsafe. So another example actually of the pitfalls I would see would actually be the opposite of that. Maybe a leader that is constantly showing up and working to micromanage. So instead of that chaotic creative freedom, we're now in a space where they're trying to control everything that's happening. So we get this guilt trip of, well, I'm staying late and working all hours, so maybe so should everybody else, if we see that our leader is doing that. And I think one of the challenges of remote working has been knowing when to switch off. That's something I see a lot of. I know that a lot of leadership was worried that we would lose work by turning remote. And actually, one of the biggest problems I see with remote working is that we don't have a physical studio to go in and kind of shake the stick and get everybody out. That's enough now, close off. I've actually seen a lot of overwork because of remote working, and that can be a big challenge. I've also obviously seen that happen in physical studios too, where people are kind of competing to be the last person at their desk just because the CEO or the lead is still there. So we have to be aware that we don't fall into this do as I say, not as I do category, especially if we have, say, work policies that are set up around sort of behaviors like anti-crunch or overtime, where we have to be aware that, if I'm working late and everybody else is trying to do the same, I should be able to stop that behavior. And that's where you get that do as I say, not as I do.
I think it's interesting. I mean, establishing balance within this sort of framework is seems to be crucial, doesn't it, really?
Yes,
So
yeah, difficult. So it's difficult in any, like I said, it's, all the problems that come down to are very human. It's about how do we
mm,
communicate with one another in order to create that balance. And we're not perfect either, we're all guilty of setting a rule and then doing completely the opposite of that when it suits us. We're not robots. We don't wake up and do everything the same every single time. Consistency can be difficult and sometimes
mm,
impossible in life, because that's just the nature, especially of games, but also of life in general. We can't predict what's going to happen. So a lot of
yeah,
this comes down to human problems.
yeah, no, definitely. So in terms of the sort of positive impact that you mentioned earlier, I mean, what would you personally define that as in terms of leadership? I mean, how can leaders ensure that they're truly making one, basically?
It's a really interesting question because defining success is difficult anyway, because everybody defines success differently. Success looks different to everyone if we went down the line. And that's what makes things so interesting in this world is, if I ask everybody, like, what do you want from life? We'll all have different ideas of what good looks like. And leadership often brings with it sort of further challenges, as sometimes you're making decisions for the team, sometimes you're going to be making decisions for the company, sometimes you're making decisions around the game itself. And sometimes those three things don't align. I make a decision for one, and it doesn't necessarily please everything. So when we say what does good look like, how do we make positive impact? We have to be aware that we're, like you said, balancing. You use that term. We're doing that across many different layers within a game studio. So for me, when it comes to sort of positive impact in games leadership, I think it comes from a leader who is aware that their decisions and but how their decisions are affecting sort of the whole game making process. That includes the
Mm,
people, that includes the company, it includes the game itself, all of those different levels. And positive impact in leadership will look completely different across different teams and studios and even projects, just because the nature of making games is moving with the changes that are happening around us. So personally, I really value consistency. That's my own personal value. I think it's really important for me to show up in my line of work as close as to being the same person as I can each day for the team. I like to be really clear on my expectations and communications. And when I'm not sure what the answer is, then I will say so. I'm really consistent in being like, actually, I don't know what that is, but let me find out for you. Um, and that's been something that I've had to learn. That's not come as I don't know, a natural thing. It's a skill that I do think I've had to learn. And you make mistakes in your career that you learn from, and the hope is that you can build on that and get a little bit closer to being the sort of leader that you intend to be each time.
Absolutely. No, it's a good way to look at things. I mean, focusing then a little bit more sort of down onto the games industry, obviously has a lot of unique challenges associated with it compared to sort of other sectors, other tech sectors, perhaps. What would you say some of the biggest obstacles are for leaders in this particular industry then?
Gosh, I mean, the obvious one right now for indies is funding, and for all studios, it's probably managing the feelings that come with the current uncertainty that I think we're seeing in the industry and that everybody is facing. We're in a period of time where people look to leadership for answers and guidance, and I think we're definitely seeing frustrations and anger when we don't get clear answers from our leadership. Um, and these can be difficult problems to navigate because sometimes there just isn't an answer. If you think of studios that have been closed down by publishers, projects cancelled, not necessarily by that studio, but by wider powers, then that can put leaders into really difficult situations. And I think we've seen a mixture of responses as well, so some good and some bad. I definitely see pressure on leadership to have all of the answers in these situations. And sometimes that can make things worse, not admitting that they don't know, or maybe not being forthcoming and providing that clarity or wanting to reassure and keep everybody calm when potentially you need to be having those more serious discussions and preparations for what's to come. Um, and it's really easy to judge from the outside. But until you're in that situation, then you often don't know how you're going to respond in that moment of leadership. So I definitely have sympathy for those who, in particular, have seemingly done everything they could have, maybe had a successful game, but current circumstances have just dealt the studio a really rough hand. And I think you just have to focus again back onto people and the human experience of bringing that team through whatever the outcome might be. So the biggest challenge that we're seeing right now, I think, is definitely navigating uncertainty.
There's a lot of, I suppose, with disruption when you are in a leadership position. You have other people to think about and that you're responsible for. Ultimately, it's you have to, again, like you were saying earlier, sort of lead by example on fronts like this. So talk to me about the Games Leadership Academy then. How do you see Games Leadership Academy addressing some of these challenges that you're describing here?
Right. So Games Leadership Academy comes from a very person-centered approach when we talk about leadership. So our aim isn't to come in and tell you what to do with your studio because each studio is different and often the team already know what will or won't work. So we're not here to come in and be like, let us tell you what to do. I work as well as a business consultant. And I know that I can see the same problem play out across 5 different studios. And in one studio, it completely destroys everything. Everything falls apart. This whatever problem that we're talking about. But maybe in another studio, they don't even notice that it's a problem. And even if they did notice, it wouldn't be a big enough problem to register on the list of problems that they're already dealing with. So they wouldn't even address it as such. Uh, so Games Leadership Academy is about let's talk about these different solutions. Let's talk about how these problems appear in our studios and the different ways in which that happens. So we do present models and proven methods, tools and research that kind of support leaders to help figure this out. But the aim is to find out what works best for your team, and the studio that you're trying to build. That's important as well. Like where are we coming from? Where do we want to be? How are we going to get there? Let's fit in that gap in between. So what we're offering at the moment is our Blueprint course. This is a 12-week online course set up to help leaders figure out their next steps, whether that's specifically dealing with things like studio structure, or it might be more for leads and how they support their team, or for new leaders stepping up into the role to work out what sort of leader they want to be. And it's an online course with group coaching. So we're hoping to slowly build up a community of leaders who will be able to share knowledge and talk about some of these issues in a more productive way.
Oh, that's very, very, very helpful. We'll put some details about the Games Leadership Blueprint course in the bottom of our description in the video. So yes, take a look down there.
Thank you.
No problem. So in terms of those practical steps, I mean, what advice would you give to leaders who are struggling to adapt to these rapid changes in the industry at the moment? What would you say?
I mean, it's easy to feel so overwhelmed right now. So try and focus on what you can change, even if those are just small things. Sometimes the smallest gesture can have really big results. One for me is to always try to value learning in these moments. What can I take forward from this? How does this change you as a person? And what does that mean going forwards? How do we find that value of learning when we're particularly going through a difficult time?
Definitely. No, that's super helpful. And I guess, in terms of those sort of practical daily habits, do you have any sort of suggestions for leaders to create that environment that promotes mutual respect and trust in all this amongst the team?
Yeah, I think it's important for leaders to figure out your why. Our actions need to feel authentic in order for them to resonate and create connection with our teams. So being performative only works for so long. So it's important that a leader understands and communicates what's important to them, whilst allowing for conversations on what's important to the team as well. And hopefully the dream is that those things can meet in the middle, and everybody kind of comes with this group identity, the studio identity. But in order for that to happen, leaders need to know their why. What is it I'm trying to do, and why am I doing it? And the single most important thing that I've seen leaders do in the games industry that gets the best results, and it's such it's a really interesting thing, but the single best thing I've seen get results for leaders is to take care of their mental health, to really understand themselves, and take responsibility for that part in their leadership. And this can be as simple as going to therapy, or building a sensible balance between work and home life. Maybe having other interests and passions that allow you to step back and take scope of what is actually happening in the studio, and then also building a network of people that you trust, so that you can have those conversations about when things are really difficult. So for example, I really love journaling. I find writing things down or talking about things through in my head really help. So I go on lots of walks. That's very essential for my mental health, is to go over lots of walks. I also have a ton of pets that seem to help offset all of that quite a lot. But yes, getting you as the leader into a good place so that you're able to figure out those next steps is one of the most important things that I think I can see in terms of healthy leadership. And I realize that can be a bit vague in terms of actions. So I'd always suggest things like asking the team, leaning in on their specific expertise when you feel like you're stuck. And that can be very freeing as a lead. I really like things like 360 feedback as well. I do that for studios. I run sessions on that. And that seemed to be quite impactful in helping leadership to get the studio talking. But yes, I also think it's important to state as well, like if you're a leader looking to promote trust and build studio culture, then that also means like you have to be prepared to hear some of the things that you may not want to as well. So that's kind of why I say you need to be in a good place before we start to improve leadership, because it comes with this responsibility. The first step is to get real cool, real fast about giving and receiving feedback, and understand that by opening that door, you're going to take on a new responsibility to help hold and navigate that feedback. I hope that makes sense. Sorry.
No, absolutely. I think all those points you've raised are super helpful, and I think ultimately it does boil. I mean, not to reduce everything down to being a better human. These things are all based in humanity, rooted in humanity. So yeah, super helpful, and I think thank you so much, Melissa. I really appreciate it. There's an awful lot there to consider, both for current leaders, but also future leaders to put into practice. Yeah, interesting. We'll include more details, like I said, about the Games Leadership Blueprint course down below, and we'll also include your details for people to get in touch as well. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, Melissa.
No problem. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. And thank you today as well for our audience who've tuned in to catch this video. There's plenty of other need to know videos out there on our Ukie TV channel on YouTube. Thank you for enjoying this one, and more very soon. Thank you so much.